Hi everyone, so today we're going to learn about fermentation, but before we do that, let's review cellular respiration. And remember, cellular respiration is when we break down our food to get energy out of it, but we need oxygen in order for that to happen. That's why it's called an aerobic process. So when you think aerobic, think oxygen. We need food and oxygen to break down the food to get energy. Now this happens in a part of our cells called the mitochondria. And mitochondria is inside of autotrophs, that means like producer cells, and heterotrophs, that means consumer cells. So no matter how an organism got its food, okay, whether it's an autotroph that does photosynthesis to get food or a heterotroph that has to consume or eat something else to get food, no matter what, we all have to do cellular respiration because once food is in our system, we have to break it down for energy. Now here's the equation for cellular respiration. Remember, reactants are what's needed. Well, we need oxygen because it's an aerobic process, and we also need our food, which comes in the form of glucose, a type of sugar. When we put these two things together, we're going to release carbon dioxide, water, and this type of energy called ATP, which our cells use in order to do any process. So it uses ATP, cells use ATP in order to communicate to other cells, to make things, to break things down. Whatever they need to do, they need ATP energy. Now on your notes, those boxes that have these words, oxygen, glucose, carbon dioxide, water, and ATP energy, I need you to drag and drop them under the right locations under reactants and products. I want you to do that same thing, dragging and dropping on the next part of your notes to the chemical formulas of these reactants and products. So to look at oxygen, we need to write it in a chemical way, 6O2. So there's 2 oxygen atoms put together, but we need 6 of those oxygen molecules. Glucose or a food is represented by C6, so there's 6 carbon, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. Okay, and that will lead to making carbon dioxide, which is CO2. There's 1 carbon and 2 oxygens put together to make carbon dioxide. And we're going to release 6 of those carbon dioxide molecules. Water is H2O, there's 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, and to make 1 water molecule, but we're going to make 6 water molecules. And we also release ATP energy. So that's an overview of cellular respiration. But sometimes we have to still break down our food for energy, but maybe we're not getting oxygen fast enough. So even though, let's say, as humans or heterotrophs, we're breathing in, maybe we're not getting oxygen fast enough to do cellular respiration. Well, we can't just stop cellular respiration because we need to break down our food for energy. So instead, if oxygen is not available, we switch over to something else called fermentation. And that's what we're going to take a look at. Now, what I want you to do is go to the second page where you have the cellular respiration and fermentation concept map. And I need you to drag and drop those parts so that it looks like this concept map in your notes. So here we break down food for energy, and if oxygen is available, that's an aerobic process. And when we break down our food for energy and oxygen is available, that's called cellular respiration. So drag and drop the box that says cellular respiration right underneath this section, okay? Now, who does cellular respiration? Drag and drop that box that says all living things, no matter if it's a plant or an animal, no matter how they got their food, they have to do cellular respiration. And when we do cellular respiration, we get ATP energy out of it. And actually the process of doing cellular respiration, every single time we do it, we get 36 ATP out of it. So now let's take a look when oxygen isn't available, but we still need to continue breaking down our food for energy, we switch over to something called fermentation. So fermentation still, we're breaking down our food so we can get energy out of our food, but oxygen isn't available. So instead of being aerobic, it's anaerobic. Anytime you see the A or AN in front of a word, it means the opposite. So in this case, oxygen is not available. This happens in the cytoplasm. That means the fluid part of the cells of both plants and animals. So if you see this area right here, anywhere surrounding those structures, those organelles, all that space, it looks like space, that's actually fluid or liquid. And that's where fermentation occurs. And there's two types of fermentation depending on the type of organism. Some organisms will do alcoholic fermentation to break down their food for energy, and some will do lactic acid fermentation. So let's take a look at alcoholic fermentation. Okay, who does this process? Organisms like yeast, and yes, yeast is a living thing, and other small microorganisms, they will use alcoholic fermentation. And what is alcoholic fermentation? They're just breaking down their food for energy, but there's oxygen that's not available. And when they do this, they will make these different products. They'll release carbon dioxide, they'll release a type of alcohol, and they'll release 2 ATP. So organisms like, let's say, yeast and other small organisms will use alcoholic fermentation. And when we make yeast and other organisms do this, we can actually make things like alcoholic beverages or bread. So by doing alcoholic fermentation, we can actually make these different types of foods and drinks. So let's go to the second page of your notes, and let's go to the right side. When we break down our food for energy, but oxygen is not available, that's anaerobic. And one of the types of fermentations that occur is called alcoholic fermentation. So drag and drop the word alcoholic fermentation in your notes to this section. Who does this process? Yeast and microorganisms or small organisms. And remember, when they do this, they do get ATP, but they only get 2 ATP. It's not a lot, but at least it's something. At least they're getting energy when they break down their food. The other type of fermentation is called lactic acid fermentation, and that's used by bacteria and us humans. So remember, fermentation is when we break down our food for energy, but we don't have enough oxygen available. So we're gonna go to fermentation. And when we do this, we will make something called lactic acid. And here, the important part, we get 2 ATP out of this. Now, when we make bacteria go through this process, we can actually use the bacteria to go through lactic acid fermentation to make certain foods like cheese, yogurt, and sour cream. Now, let's take a look at our concept map in our notes. So remember, when we break down food for energy and oxygen isn't available, and that's anaerobic because oxygen's not there, we do the process of lactic acid fermentation. So drag and drop this term into your notes into the section. Who does this process? Bacteria and humans. And how much ATP energy is produced? 2 ATP. So if you see, which one is giving us more energy? Well, cellular respiration gives us much more energy, but the thing is oxygen has to be available. When we do fermentation, depending on the organism, some do lactic acid, some do alcoholic fermentation, they only get 2 ATP energy, and that's good when we need quick bursts of energy. But for cellular respiration, it's good for when we need longer periods of energy. Now, humans do lactic acid fermentation, and I'm sure you've felt this. We use lactic acid fermentation when oxygen isn't available, and it's for quick bursts of energy. When we do that, we make lactic acid, and that builds up in our muscles, and that's what causes that burning sensation when you work out. Okay, when you're lifting weights, when you're running, even when you're walking up a lot of stairs, you'll start to feel like the burning sensation in your legs or your arms. That is a sign that lactic acid is building up. That's a sign that you have switched over from cellular respiration to lactic acid fermentation. And the only way to get rid of that burning sensation is to just breathe in or take in more oxygen. So that's the difference between fermentation and cellular respiration. Make sure you know this concept map.